Hold on. Let's see if we can get it. I would love to tell you why I'm doing this, but there is no good reason. It's my birthday this week, and Matt told me, for your birthday, you can do whatever you want on stage. And so here I am, on a horse, wearing a robe, living my best life. Actually, this is only acceptable if you are a child or in a parade. Two things of, especially if you do this. And now the parade has begun. I'm trying not to hit the babies in the second row. All this, this is completely acceptable if you're in a parade. I could be riding on a stick horse with a Burger King crown, wearing a bathrobe, and everyone would be like, he's got candy. When else in life is this socially appropriate? Staycations. That's the other time it's appropriate. No, I'll tell you what. We'll make sense of that in a hot minute. But it's really hot, so I'm going to take this off. As a kid, I watched a lot of Thanksgiving Day parades. Anybody watch those? Yeah. All 6 of us watched them, which is good. Have you ever been in a parade? Yes. Do you want to be in a parade after doing it one time? No one. And if you say yes, you're wrong. But it's okay. I still love you. There's grace for you. But parades are really fun if you're a kid getting candy on the side, or if you're an adult waving at the parade as it goes by. But if you're in it, I did way too many of those in marching bands. I can't do any more. I'm done. But I remember there was this one moment. I was 8 years old. We were watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And I was watching one of the most iconic characters of the early 90s in balloon form, going down the road, big purple dinosaur named Barney. And Barney is floating for the world to see, and I'm watching and I'm cheering on in front of our giant 13-inch TV, and I don't know what it was not large. And I'm watching the parade, and then all of a sudden this wind tunnel comes through, and you see these balloons just start going like this, and the people holding them are like freaking out, and Barney rips in half. And I remember as an 8-year-old kid going, and my dad, because he is quick-witted and sarcastic, was like, well, there's a dramatic turn of events for you. And I'm like, that's not a dramatic turn of events, that's trauma, is what that is, unfolding in front of my eyes. That was my childhood. I remember that story very vividly. I don't know where you are at in life today, but maybe you are at a moment where you are ready for a dramatic turn of events. Maybe not for your favorite childhood character to get ripped into, but maybe something else, where you're like, I need something to happen. Something's got to give. I've been spiraling down, or life has been too hard, or I'm up against a wall. I need a turn of events. Or maybe you're in a place where you have experienced that before, and you know the relief that comes when all of a sudden all of that pressure just starts to drop. And it's like, okay. Well, that's where we're at in the book of Esther. We're looking in this Don't Miss Your Moment series at the life and the story of Esther, and we are in need of a dramatic turn of events. But the beautiful thing, and the truth that I want to start you with, and maybe some of you check out after this, and good for you, but try not to. There is nothing that our God can't do. There is nothing our God can't do. And here in the story, in the book of Esther, we have not seen God's name. It's hard to look in and see what God is doing. It's what is going on. My oldest son is not here today, but he's been sitting in and listening to these stories over the last few weeks, and it's his first time going through Esther, and he's like, Dad, this is a weird story. He's not wrong, because up to this point, it's all been weird, and things are going downhill quick, and we are in need of a dramatic turn of events. Let me catch you up if you've missed it, or if you're just joining for the first time today, you can always go back and rewatch and catch back up, or just read the story of Esther and catch up with us. But here's what's happened. Esther has gone from a nobody to queen. A dramatic shift in her authority and in her life. The guy who raised her as basically an adopted father, Mordecai, is inspiring her faith, is trying to push her, is trying to help her, but at the same time, he is compromised to get where he is today. Then there's a bad guy. His name is Haman. And Haman is like nasty bad guy. Like, pick your worst bad guy in all of history, Haman. He is the example of that. And Haman is just livid. He is mad at Mordecai because Mordecai is supposed to be bowing to him, and he's not. because he refuses to bow to anyone other than God. He refuses to bow and to compromise in that way. And so Haman just despises this man. Now, Mordecai has recently inspired Esther and said, something's got to give. All of the Jews are about to be wiped out because Haman hated Mordecai so much he was going to wipe out all Jews altogether. Mordecai's like, hey, we got to do something. Esther's like, yeah, that's probably a good idea. We should do something. And so they do something, or they start to. And we're trying to figure out what's going on. And Mordecai's inspiring Esther, and Esther's reaching out to all of the Jews in the area and inspiring them to pray and to ask God to move. And that's where we find ourselves. And Esther's request to the king was that he would come to a banquet. If you are a dude in the room or a dude watching online and somebody says, hey, come join me for free food, you're gonna show up. You're just going to. You're gonna show up. And not only was there free food, the king was a very fine enthusiast of the alcoholic beverage, and so there was plenty of that to go around. And so she invites the king, she invites Haman, and only those two to this banquet. And at the end of this banquet, they are high in spirits, and they are loving life, and they leave, and Haman comes across Mordecai, who again refuses to bow. And now the best day ever, the best feast he's ever had, is ruined because this one dude won't bow to me. And he's so high and mighty, and he's so worked up that he goes home and he complains to his wife and he complains to his family, and he decides, you know what? The most rational thing I could possibly do in this moment would be to put up a giant pole that I could peg him on. But that's what he does. And that's where we're left in the story. And now all of a sudden, we have a bad guy who's going to sleep with a dream of skewering another man. And that's a pretty bad dream, but he's a pretty bad dude, so it makes sense. And now we have, into chapter 6, a king who is ready to go to bed at the end of the night, and he lays down, and he can't fall asleep at all. Have you ever had one of those nights? You lay in bed, and you just toss and turn, and your mind is racing, but your body's exhausted. Or your body's still awake, but your mind's exhausted. And you got nothing, but you also can't fall asleep, and you're just kind of doing one of these things. Well, the king could have done a number of things. He could have called in the royal harpist to come play him a ditty, and he could fall asleep. He could have turned on Tiger King and binged that for a while. Or just a real life tiger in front of him. He's a king. He could do whatever he wants. He could live it out. He could have done what I did as a kid, books on record. I had some. I had the Sesame Street books on turntable where, it dings when you're supposed to turn the page. The problem is if you do that as a bedtime story, you have to get up and flip the record over. And that just defeats the whole purpose, and you wake right back up. So he didn't choose that. He could have chose Dr. Seuss. He could have done a little one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish. Didn't do that. Instead, he picks one of the most boring things in the world to be presented to him. Chapter 6, verse 1. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be read to him. He could have picked a Dave Shephard sermon. He could have picked anything he wanted, but instead he chose last month's minutes from their board meeting. Read those to me. And while he's there trying to fall asleep, being read the most boring story of his life, which is his own story, that's kind of ironic, he's there lying in bed, and all of a sudden he hears about this guy named Mordecai who interceded when two people tried to plot to kill the king, and Mordecai interceded. He told Esther about it, saved the king's life. And the king, in his almost asleepness, sits up and goes, wait a second, what happened? Well, what have we done to honor this dude? This guy saved my life. What did we do? Did we do anything? And his assistant who's reading the book is like, no, we didn't do anything. Did you do anything? No, I didn't do anything. And did you do something? And they're like, oh, nothing happened. We didn't do anything. And now all of a sudden the king can't sleep again because he's now thinking about the guy who saved his life that he did nothing. He didn't even say thank you. No thank you card, no teleflora, nothing. Like he didn't order some edible arrangements, like nothing. He just let the guy go. And now he's going, well, we got to do something about this. And enter Haman, the bad guy, who also can't sleep because he's also thinking about Mordecai, but because he wants to turn him into a Mordecai kebab. And so we have a guy who wants to execute Mordecai, and we have a guy who wants to honor Mordecai in the same place at the same time. The king's like, oh, this guy, Haman, he has never let me down. He's never had a bad idea in his life. He's only fed me the best possible information and the best possible ideas, which is not true, by the way. And Haman comes in, and the king's like, he asks this beautiful question in Esther 6. He says, hey, what should be done for the man that the king delights to honor? That is a beautiful question. And Haman is a straight up narcissist, okay? Haman's like, well, this is the second half. Like, this is beautiful, second half of that verse. Now, Haman thought to himself, who in the world could the king want to honor more than me? I mean, have you seen these muscles? These sandals? Like, come on, I am the man. And so he plots this extravagant thing. He thinks, well, what would I want if the king were to honor me? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Like, come on, king, I know you're just being coy. Like, you don't want to say you want to honor me, but I know you want to honor me. And so here's what I would say. I would say, maybe put on one of the king's robes. Just for example, it's not what I would want necessarily, but whoever you'd want to honor. I'd put a robe on him. And, again, I wouldn't want this, but somebody else might want it. And you could have him riding on a royal horse with a crown on his head, just hypothetically. And you could have somebody pulling the horse and just shouting, hey, everyone, come see the most amazing man in the world. Just for example, king, if that's what you'd like to do. And the king, I never blame the guy who comes up with terrible ideas. I always blame the guy who says, yeah, that's a good idea. Because there's a very big difference in brainstorming. If you come up with a bad idea, that's fine. But if somebody says, that's a good idea, it's on them now. It's not you. Okay? So this is what happens. And the king's like, Haman, you are a genius. That is the best idea you've ever given me, of any idea that you've ever given me. Let's go ahead and do that. And this is one of the greatest moments in the history of the entire Bible, because he says, you know what? Let's do that. In fact, because it was your idea, you lead the horse. And we're going to put Mordecai on it, and we're going to thank him for everything that he's done. And now Haman's like, wait, what? The dude who I hate? The dude who refuses to bow to me? I came in here to tell you I plan to put him on a stick and rotate him around the campfire. And you're telling me that I'm going to be dragging him across on a horse all around town. And the next thing you know, guess what day it is in Susa? It's Mordecai Day. And everybody's got their Mordecai, I love Mordecai t-shirts, and there's swag bags for everybody. And there's these parades going around. 76 trombones are leading the big parade. And there's Susa phones in Susa. Huh? Those of you who don't understand that, we're never in band, and shame on you. Okay? And away they go, and there's snow cones for everyone, and there's confetti being thrown, and I picture like Prince Ali, fabulous, like picture that scene, 100 bad guys with swords, like picture that scene, all playing out, and here's Mordecai just, parade waving on his horse, while Haman is getting pelted in the face with confetti, smelling the beautiful smell of deep fried Oreos in the background. Oh. Everybody's got their little bag, and they're like, Mordecai, woo! And here's Haman, just, come see the greatest man in the history of the world. Haman's having to pull him around and say the thing that he wanted said about him. And it's the most beautiful, poetic justice played out in real life. And all of a sudden, we see a pretty dramatic turn of events, where up to this point, it seems like everything is going downhill and downhill and downhill and downhill, and all the Jews are about to be wiped out. But wait a second. Now all of a sudden, the bad guy is pulling the good guy around. And it says Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai, led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. What an embarrassing thing that must have been to say when you planned this for you. And now you're doing it for somebody else. And so he goes home, head hung low. He's exhausted. He's sweaty. He's got confetti stuck to his face from all the sweat and all the dirt. And he tells his wife what happens. And these are my words, not hers. You can read her words. It's pretty similar. She says, yeah, you picked the wrong dude to mess with, buddy. You should have picked somebody else. Thanks for the support, honey. But if you're a bad guy, maybe you deserve that, right? And so, maybe not, but maybe. So all of this plays out, and we see the most beautiful irony play out in front of us, where we're waiting for God to show up, and now all of a sudden, how the turntables have turned. That's not how the expression goes, but you get the idea. Here's the thing. In your life, in your moments, when you're trying to figure out where is God, what is God doing, how am I going to move forward, where's my dramatic turn of events, when's my Mordecai Day parade, when is all of this going to play out, here is a truth to hold on to. God is at work even when you don't see him. And in this story, we haven't seen God intervene, we haven't seen God show up, we haven't seen his name played out in anything. But it's pretty impossible to deny what he's doing here. See, in just the first few verses of chapter 6, we see this extraordinary sequence of events that could only have been orchestrated by God. Here we have a guy, a king, who can't sleep. And what does he choose when he can't sleep? He chooses the book of his records of reign. And what page does he happen to flip open to? Oh yeah, that part where Mordecai saved his life. And then all of a sudden, well, who should I brainstorm ideas with? Enter Haman, who shows up on the scene. And because Haman came up with this great idea, he's now the one who has to lead the hero around. And all of these events happen, and you see, oh, okay, maybe all this time where I thought God wasn't there, maybe he was the whole time. Maybe this is starting to play out in a way that only God can create. And in fact, this is my favorite part. When you start reading the Bible and you start connecting stories together, you start like going, because God's there going, listen, I see that you think I'm not here. I see you're wondering where I'm at. I hear your prayers. I hear your cries. I've been here before. Like, you don't have to worry about this. Because when I flip backwards, this is a crazy, crazy story. Genesis. The book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. Enter a man named Joseph. Joseph is a man who was sold into slavery into Egypt by his brothers. Good dudes, right? Thanks, brothers. Although I thought about that when I was a kid once too. And so they sell him off, and he ends up in prison. Under Pharaoh's command, he's in prison, and he's interpreting dreams for people while he's in there because God has given him the ability and the talent to be able to do that. And so he's interpreting dreams. Pharaoh has a really bad dream, and he's like, I need somebody to interpret this. And the only person they could think of was Joseph. And so Joseph comes out of prison. He interprets this dream for the king, and the king is so beside himself at Joseph's abilities and what Joseph shared with him that this is what happens. This is just crazy. Genesis 41. You remember what happened to Mordecai? Mordecai Day, all the swag bags, all that sort of good stuff? This is what happened in Genesis 41. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen, put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride around on the chariot as second in command, and the people shouted before him, make way! Do you see a connection here? It's like the same story playing out centuries later in a different man's life. And here we have a God who's going, listen, I see your concern. I know what's going on. I've been there, done that, taken care of it. I'm going to do it again. In fact, I might show off a little and do the exact same thing, and you never saw it coming. And he plays this out in front of them. And sometimes I think in our lives, we're in the moments where we're waiting for God to show up. We're waiting for these miracle moments. We're asking God to do what only he can do. And I just don't see you yet. God, where are you? Where are you? And sometimes I think if we just step back in history and look and take perspective for a second, we can see that God's done it before. He can do it again. And God's done it before, and he can do it again. And this wall that I'm up against, this obstacle that's in front of me, is nothing that God hasn't seen before. And if he conquered it then, he can conquer it now. He is the same God, the same person who's orchestrating the same stories because he loves you and he wants to care for you, and God redeems in a way that only he can. It's a beautiful way that God works and shows himself over time. Now, let me talk about the way that God shows himself, because this is another crazy part of the book of Esther. Let me give you a little bit of a snapshot here. If you are a literature person, maybe you've heard this word before, particularly biblical literature. This happens from time to time. There's something called chiastic structure. Chiastic structure is based off of the Greek word or Greek letter chi, which is our letter X. That's where we get X in Christmas. Chi represents Christ in what happens here. And so a chiastic structure is a book where everything flows in this linear line, and then this magical, dramatic turn of events happens, and everything starts playing backwards in reverse sequence, but making all of the bad things of the first half correct. And so all of this sequence of bad events that we see in the book of Esther leads to a dramatic moment right here where the tables get turned, and every bit of the story that we've heard up to this point is going to be rewritten, but in a redemptive way. It's a beautiful, beautiful way to write a story. It's a beautiful symbol of the actual work of Christ, who takes our broken, messy stories and rewrites them into one with a redemptive end, one with life. And so our chiastic structure in this book looks like this. If you're a note taker, start writing, or just take a picture, and you'll catch this. And we'll show this in the next few weeks as things start being rewritten. This is what happened. The splendor of King Xerxes and the two banquets happens in chapter 1. And then Esther becomes queen, and Mordecai saves the king. Haman gets exalted into power. Haman decrees annihilation of the Jews. Mordecai and Esther, they plan to reverse the decree, even though they don't quite know what to do yet. Esther has her first banquet, and Haman plans Mordecai's execution. That's where we were last week. And today, Haman is humiliated, and Mordecai is honored. We see a flip in that story. Now, what you're going to see in the next couple of weeks as we end this book is every one of these points is going to be reversed. Every one of them. I spoiled the ending. I'm sorry. But this is how God works. This is God's ability to take the bad and turn it into something good. This is God's ability to say, this is messy and broken, and Mordecai and Esther are messy and broken people, and they're in a broken world. But guess what? I'm bigger than all of that, and I can rewrite stories, and I can rewrite history, and I can change lives. And in fact, grand reversals are one of God's specialties. He's good at it. If you need one of those moments in your life where you're like, ooh, we're spiraling, I need something new, guess what God's really good at? He's really good at writing something new. And he's really good at taking your mess and your brokenness and healing and restoring and building you up into a better image of himself. Like, this is what God does through human history. This is one of God's greatest trademarks. This is what God does. He does reversals. He changes lives. Only God can do this. And in fact, this is my favorite thing about it. God does what only God can do, and he brings a result in the way that only God can. So many times, it is only God who brings the results. Sometimes we think a little bit higher of ourselves than we ought to, and we think, well, I'm producing this result. No. You're doing God's work. He does the result. God does the results. God is in charge of that. You're just in charge of being faithful and obedient to what he asks you to do. That's the end of your part. If God leads, we do, and he produces results. God leads, we do, he produces results. This is how God works through human history. This is how God works through us. We cannot provide the results. That's God's job, and I'm thankful for that because he uses the lives of ordinary, messy, broken men and women, regular old Joes, no perfect people allowed. That is our church. No perfect people allowed. God can use those people. He can use us to rewrite stories, to shape lives, to change our community, to change our world through our work as we step out in active, obedient faith and just trust God to do what only he can do. In fact, I love the only God stories, like the stories where God shows up and God does only what God can do. Because here's one from this week. On Tuesday, I'm sitting in my office and I'm eating lunch, and all of a sudden our little doorbell rings, which goes off anytime somebody opens the door. And I look, and here's somebody coming in with 3 generators because he's seen us do community events all over. He knows our heart to go out and do inflatables for people and honor kids and families and do these outdoor events and take care of people. And he saw that we had to borrow and rent generators anytime we want to do this. And he said, well, you guys just need some, so I bought you 3. I'm sorry, what? Like, I didn't ask for that. I never reached out. I never said, hey, would somebody please donate these? In fact, I did. I prayed about it for about 2 years. I never said anything to anyone about this, but I have a running list of things that I pray for regularly for our church that would help us do ministry better and more and expand what we're able to do. And on that list were 2 generators. And God's like, you don't need 2, you need 3. And he shows up and he does this. And I look at other ways. Did I spit on you in the front row? Oh, you're sweating. Okay, that's fine. I thought maybe you were in the splash zone. I'll get you a poncho next week. Anyway, so that's weird and gross. I'm sorry. God has a way of doing this. And I look at the history of our church, and I look at the fact that hundreds and hundreds of people have made decisions to follow Jesus or return to Jesus because of the work of this church. That's only God. We can't do that. We do our part and God does the results. I look at the fact that we've been able to give away over $300,000 to church plants to help get them started in their churches and in their communities. I look at the fact that we've given over 3,000 pairs of shoes away to kids at local elementary schools. We can't, this is God at work. And not only is it God at work, the stories that come from that, when we sit down, actually we kneel down in front of kids and we change their shoes from old to new. It's like a foot washing deal where we put on a brand new pair of shoes on these kids. And the number of stories of little boys and little girls who pray, oh, I prayed for pink shoes last night and God heard we didn't pick the color. We just stuck a name on the box. God did the work. God shows up and God does things. And I look at somebody who got a brand new pair of shoes, who has never owned a brand new pair of anything in her life, right next to somebody who only owns brand new things. And for just a moment, they are on exactly the same playing field. And that is a game changer. And I look at the way that God has moved. I look at the way that God has changed lives. I look at the people who've been baptized here at this church, and we're about to have another baptism service in just a couple weeks. Shameless plug, sign up, where you can be a part of that. And God works and God moves and God does the things that only God can do. And I look at our future building and what's ahead of us, and I think only God can make this happen. And that's the way I want it. I want it in a way where only God can do it, because if we can take credit for it, we're doing something wrong. Because God is the one who produces results. It is just up to us to be obedient and faithful and to listen to what he says and go, okay, that's what I'll do. And he shows up and he does miracles. And that's what I'm praying for in this future home. I'm praying for miracles. I'm praying for God to show up in crazy, powerful ways. And here's what I know from Ephesians 3:20. It says, he is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine because of his work in us. God can do so much more. See, I'm sitting here praying for 2 generators and God's like, nah, you need more. You can do more. Sometimes I think we pray too small because we're thinking, well, God, just this would be nice. And he's like, no. I can do so much better than that. And in our lives, especially if you have a story that needs help being rewritten, pray big, because God is bigger than any of those prayers. And God can rewrite your story, and God can change your life. Don't miss your moment to ask God to write the story in front of you. Don't miss it. Chapter 7 and 8 come next week. This week, read chapter 6. We'll catch up next week. God, I pray over everyone in this room, everyone watching online, whether it's today or in the future, Lord, I pray that you would meet us exactly where we're at, that you would inspire us with the next steps that are in front of us, that you would lead us well, and that we would be obedient to your leading, and you would just bless the steps ahead of us in the way that only you can. God, I pray for only God miracle stories left and right through this church and through everyone who listens. Lord, I pray that you would be working and stirring in their midst, in my midst. God, that you would be doing the things that only you can do. And God, I pray as we step out in faithful obedience, not even knowing necessarily where you are, but just trusting that you are right there every step of the way. God, I pray that you would meet us there, that you would inspire us and encourage us and challenge us and grow us. And I pray that our eyes are open to see the miracles you're doing all around, that we would see you writing the story. And we would trust you to write it in exactly the way that you need to, because it's your story. And you can do more than we could ever ask or imagine. So God, would you bless? Would you provide miracles? And would you write this story in the way that only you can? In Jesus' name, amen.